Hello, welcome back to Teen Story Share. This week we're going to be reading from The Downstairs Girl by Stacey Lee, and I'll just start with the description in the front because it sums it up pretty well. Some secrets just won't stay buried. By day, 17-year-old Jo Kuan works as a lady's maid for the cruel daughter of one of the wealthiest men in Atlanta. But by night, Jo moonlights as the pseudonymous author of a newspaper advice column for the genteel Southern lady, Dear Miss Sweetie. When her column becomes wildly popular, she uses the power of the pen to address some of society's ills. But she's not prepared for the backlash that follows when her column challenges fixed ideas about race and gender. While her opponents clamor to uncover the secret identity of Miss Sweetie, a mysterious letter sets Jo off on a search for her own past and the parents who abandoned her as a baby. But when her efforts put her in the crosshairs of Atlanta's most notorious criminal, Jo must decide whether she, a girl used to living in the shadows, is ready to step into the light. This book is really cool, in my opinion, because, for one thing, the main character is just really funny and likable, and she really has a way with words, which you'll see what I mean. And also, the really cool thing about this book is it tells a story that you don't often see in history books, which is the experiences of Chinese American people in the South in the decades after the Civil War, which I thought was really cool to get that perspective that you don't often hear about. The Downstairs Girl by Stacey Lee. Chapter 1. Being nice is like leaving your door wide open. Eventually, someone's going to mosey in and steal your best hat. Me, I have only one hat, and it is uglier than a smashed crow, so if someone stole it, the joke would be on their head, literally. Still, boundaries must be set, especially boundaries over one's worth. Today, I will demand a raise. You're making that pavement twitchy the way you're staring at it. Robbie Withers shines his smile on me. Ever since the traveling dentist who pulled Robbie's rotting molar told him he would lose more if he didn't scrub his teeth regularly, he has brushed twice daily, and he expects me to do it too. Pavement is underappreciated for all it does to smooth the way, I tell his laughing eyes, which are brown like eagle's feathers, same as his skin. We should be more grateful. Robbie gestures grandly at the ground. Pavement, we're much obliged, despite all the patty cakes we dump on you. He pulls me away from a pile of manure. It was Robbie's mother who nursed me when I was a baby, God rest her soul. And it was she who told old Jin about the secret basement under the print shop. Whitehall Street, the spine of Atlanta, rises well above the treetops with her stately brick and imposing stone buildings, along with the occasional Victorian house that refuses to give up her seat at the table. Business is good here, and like the long-leaf pine forests, being burned by Sherman's troops a quarter-century ago only made the city grow back stronger. You look different today. I pretend to appraise him from his cap to his tan trousers. You forget something? It is rare to see him without the mule and cart he uses as a delivery man for Bucksbaum's department store. They're down a clerk. Mr. Bucksbaum's letting me fill in until they find someone new. He straightens his pin-striped jacket, though it's already straight enough to measure with. You don't say. Mr. Bucksbaum is popular among whites and colored alike, but hiring a colored clerk isn't done in these parts. If I do a good job, maybe he'll let me fill in on a more permanent basis. He gives me a tight smile. If you don't stick your foot out, you'll never advance. You'd be perfect for the job. I myself am fixing to ask Mrs. English for a raise. He whistles, a short, low sound. If Mrs. English had any sense, she'd give it to you. Of course, common sense was never very common in these parts. I nod, a surge of righteous blood flooding my veins. 2 years I have worked as a milliner's assistant, at the same wage of 50 cents a day. Measly. It is already $18.90. Plus, old Jin has lost too much weight, and I need to buy him medicine. Not a booty ball or buckeye powder, but something legitimate. And legitimate costs money. One of the newly electric streetcars approaches, bringing by an audience of Southerners in various stages of confusion at the sight of me. An Eastern face in Western clothes always sets the game wheels to spinning between curiosity and disapproval. Most of the time, the pointer lands on disapproval. I should charge them the privilege of ogling me. Of course, I'd have to split the fee with Robbie, whose 6-foot height also draws attention, even as he keeps his eyes on the sidewalk. He stops walking and squares his cap so that it's flat enough to play chess on. Here's my stop. Good luck, Joe. Thanks, but keep some for yourself. He winks, then slips down a narrow alley to use the back door to Bucksbaum's. Old Jin tells me things have changed for the worse since I was born. After good old President Hayes returned the South to home rule, Dems told colored people they should use the back alleys from then on, which pretty much sums up everything. Fluffing the sleeves of my russet dress, which have lost their puff and hang like a pair of deflated lungs, I carry myself a block farther to English's millinery. The shop stands between a candle maker and a seed store, meaning it can smell like a Catholic church or alfalfa, depending on which way the wind blows. This morning, however, the air is still too crisp to hold a scent. The picture windows are as clear as our Lord's eyes, how I left them last night, with several mauve hats displayed. Mauve is having a moment. Instead of going through the front, I also trek to the back entrance. Folks care less about which door Chinese people use nowadays, compared with when the laborers were shipped in to replace the field slaves after the war. Perhaps whites feel the same way about us as they do about ladybugs. A few are fine, but a swarm turns the stomach. 3 boxes have been left by the back door, and I gather them in my arms, then enter. The sight of Lizzie trying on the nearly finished, sensible hat I'd been designing stopped me in my tracks. What is she doing here so early? She barely traipses in at 9 when the shop opens, and it's not even 8:15. Good morning. I set the boxes on our work table, which is already weighed down with reams of felt. The broadsides for the charity horse race are barely dry, and orders are already flooding in. Fashion is supposed to rest on Lent, but God will surely make an exception for the event of the year. The proprietress will probably want me to stay late again, or work during the lunch hour so she can sneak off to nip her Coca cordial. Well, not without a raise, I won't. Mrs. English wants to speak with you, Lizzie says in her breathy voice. She smooths the hand down the rooster tail I'd pinned to the sensible hat with an eternity knot. Ringlets of strawberry blonde hair play peekaboo under the saucer brim. I remove my floor-length cloak and black hat, one of the misfits that Mrs. English let me purchase at a discount, this one made possible through Lizzie's clumsy hands. Then I tie on a lace apron. The velvet curtain separating the store from the workroom jerks to one side, and Mrs. English bustles in. There you are, she says in her haughty schoolmarm's voice. I dust off my drab shop cap. Good morning, ma'am. I had an idea. What if, instead of wearing these toadstools, we model our latest styles? See how fetching my sensible hat looks on Lizzie? Mrs. English frowns. Put on the toadstools, both of you. Yes, ma'am, Lizzie and I say in unison. I slip my cap over my head. I should ask now, before she asks me to stay late, so my request does not appear a hair-trigger reaction. I wipe my palms on my skirt. Mrs. English? Joe, I will no longer be requiring your services. I clamp my mouth shut when her words catch up to me. No longer required? I'm dismissed? I only need one shop girl, and Lizzie will do. Lizzie draws in a sharp breath. Her normally sleepy eyes open wide enough to catch gnats. Lizzie, open the packages. I hope the new boater block's in one of them. Mrs. English wiggles her fingers. Yes, ma'am. Drawers clatter as Lizzie rummages for a knife. But, I turn my back on Lizzie and lower my pipes to a whisper. Mrs. English, I trained her. I can felt a block twice as fast as her. I'm never late, and you said I have an eye for color. I can't lose this job. It took me almost 2 years to find steady work after my last dismissal, and old Jin's meager wage as a groom isn't enough to sustain us both. We'd be back to living hand to mouth, tiptoeing on the edges of disaster. A bubble of hysteria works up in my chest, but I slowly breathe it out. At least we have a home. It's dry, warm, and rent-free. one of the perks of living secretly in someone else's basement. As long as you have a home, you have a place to plan and dream. The woman sighs, something she does often. Her great bosom has a personality of its own, at times riding high, and at times twitchy and nervous, like when the mayor's wife pays a visit. Today's gusting tests the iron grip of her corset. Her rheumy eyes squint up at me, towering over her. You make some of the ladies uncomfortable. Each of the syllables slaps me on the cheeks. Uncomfortable. And mortification pours like molten iron from my face to my toes. But I'm good at my job. The solicitor's wife even called the silk knots I tied for her bonnet extraordinary. So what about me causes such offense? I wash regularly with soap, even the parts that don't show. I keep my black hair neatly braided and routinely scrub my teeth with a licorice root, thanks to Robbie. I'm not sluggish like Lizzie or overbearing like Mrs. English. In fact, I'm the least offensive member of our crew. It's because I'm... My hand flies to my cheek, dusky and smooth as the Asian steps. I know you can't help it. It's the lot you drew. She matches her round eyes with mine, which are just as round, but taper at the outside corners. But it's not just that. You're a saucebox. She squints at my cap, and I regret calling it a toadstool. You don't know when to keep your opinions to yourself. She draws back her head, causing her neck to bunch. Women want to be complimented. They do not want to be told they look washed out, square in the jaw, or pie-faced. If a hat made me look pie-faced, I would certainly want to know before I purchased it. Lizzie routinely gives opinions. Just last week she told a woman with a lumpy head that maybe she should give up wearing hats entirely. Mrs. English only smiled. I'm about to give my opinion of her opinion, but that would only prove her point. I only wish to help them find the best fit. I try to keep a tight grip on my indignation, but my voice trembles. Well, the simple fact is that you are not the best fit here. Today will be your last day. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm sure you will have no trouble getting a job as a lady's maid or some such. A lady's maid? I suck in my breath. Now that would be a fall backward. Not that someone like me can be choosy. Not a hatter's apprentice, of course. She jabs the pin in deeper. I have already talked to the 16, and they will not hire you. Despite being competitors, the 16 milliners that dress Atlantis heads are tight-ass hat bands. Something bangs on the floor, but Lizzie's apologies for dropping the boulder block sound far away. I have been blacklisted. Servants are routinely blacklisted when their services come to an end, even when they have done nothing to deserve it, except working their fingers to the breaking point each day, coming in early, leaving late, cleaning up other people's messes, painstakingly redoing their stitches. I can barely breathe. But I can't risk you spilling my secrets. The door chimes clang, and Mrs. English scurries back to the front. Tears gather in my eyes, and I press my sleeves to them before they fall. And I had once thought Mrs. English kind for taking a chance on me. The proprietress pokes her head back into the workroom. Joe, a lady is asking for you. I swallow the lump in my throat. Me? No one has ever asked for me, and it's a little early for customers. The precise words were, the Chinese girl, and so I had to give it my best shot. Don't dawdle. I dry my face and follow her into the shop. On the other side of the oak counter stands a woman in a gray suit with a modest bustle and a white blouse with a high collar. Narrow shoulders slope into an equally narrow neck, a pointed chin, and high cheekbones. Her prematurely white hair is tied into a practical knot. I gasp. It's Mrs. Bell, my upstairs neighbor. Though we have kept our existence secret from the printer and his family, I have stolen glances at them through the print shop window. Her flannel gray eyes spread over me, and I can almost hear the underground walls of our home caving in. Outside, a whip cracks. A mule brays, and the last of my hopes seem to stampede away. Chapter 2. Dear Miss Sweetie, 6 months ago, a Jewish family moved in next door. These people do the oddest things, kissing scrolls in the doorway, building huts in their yards to camp in. singing gibberish words and waving branches. It's enough to shake the powder from my wig. How can we restore the quality of our neighborhood? Sincerely, Mr. and Mrs. Respectable. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Respectable, you could move. Sincerely, Miss Sweetie. This is Mrs. Bell. Well, don't just stand there. Speak, girl. Mrs. English puts her fists on her hips. Even her bosom seems to glare at me, frozen in front of her. Has the woman come to have me arrested? If it were discovered that 2 Chinese people were squatting in her basement, we could be imprisoned or worse. In this part of the world, mobs form as easily and violently as cloudbusters. Ma'am, how do you do? I force my face into something pleasant, or at least less grim. Act natural. If she's looking for the Chinese girl who's been tunneling under her, she's got the wrong one. Never mind, I'm the only one for miles and miles. My twitchy fingers pluck a fan from a basket. Nice weather we're having. Mrs. English snatches the fan and glares at me. Yes, says Mrs. Bell, despite the gloom outside. Now that I am forced to face the woman, I have to admit, she appears more bemused than angry. Her dark eyebrows steepling, her mouth halfway ajar. She unpins her hat from her head, a simple spooner in mourning dove gray, and sets it on the counter. I have been admiring the knot embellishment on my friend's hat, and she said it was made by the Chinese girl who works here. The solicitor's wife. I stop fidgeting. Perhaps our residence is still a secret. Mrs. Bell gestures to her hat. I was hoping you could do the same for me. Mrs. English clears her throat. Actually, she is busy. Her eyes flit to a familiar folder beside the cash register. We're taking inventory today. My jaw grinds. That tedious chore is typically done on Friday, but she's trying to get her money's worth out of my last day. Lizzie never gets the numbers to come out right. But, she adds, I would be happy to assist you myself. Mrs. Bell's head pulls back a notch as she addresses Mrs. English. You can do the Chinese knots too? No. The proprietress's mouth draws in like a purse string being cinched. She had thought my knots looked bizarre, but didn't complain when the solicitor's wife paid her handsomely for the work. I would be happy to do it, I cautiously pipe up. If Mrs. Bell has come to arrest me, where's the constable? The shock of my dismissal may have dulled my perception, but the woman's behavior doesn't strike me as someone who has smoked out a rat. In addition, the prospect of sticking Lizzie with the inventory makes me positively giddy. But the embellishment will take more than a day, Mrs. English says with a meaningful jab of her eyebrow. Mrs. Bell presses her palms together. Oh, take your time. I don't need it for a couple of weeks. I can do it in a day. I steer a brave smile toward the proprietress, hoping to unearth a pebble of pity in her stony heart. Mrs. English fans herself. Waves of gardenia crash over us. If you pay in cash, I would reconsider. Ah, I might have something even better than cash. Mrs. Bell fingers the edge of her hat. Her arthritic joints stretch the fabric of her well-worn gloves, and the pads of her fingers are starting to show through. Money is tight in that family. I hold my breath, caught between wondering what she could offer and worrying that there is more to this visit than meets the eye. You see, my husband runs the Focus. In exchange for the work, we could give you a month of advertisement, the equivalent of $3. I am told the piece cost $1.50. You'd be getting twice the value. Front page, Mrs. English briskly counters, plus assurances that you will not run competing advertisements. When Mrs. Bell doesn't answer, the proprietress pours on some charm. Each piece that leaves our hands is a unique work of art. But don't go to New York or the Metropolitan Museum might pinch it from you. She bats her fan at Mrs. Bell. No one butters a biscuit like Mrs. English. Mrs. Bell's genteel smile doesn't falter, but her finger spools a loose thread on her sleeve. A 1-week exclusive is all I can offer. The two women continue to haggle, though Mrs. Bell's eyes keep wandering to me. I untwist my arms and try not to look like I'm hiding something. Unlike the proprietress, whose speech modulates like a stage actress's. The publisher's wife's voice is as steady as an oak table. It comforts me, even as I worry about the coincidence of her visit. I'm reminded of all those songs she sang to calm Nathan, songs that also soothed me, 2 years younger than him. Her tales of growing up on her parents' sheep farm enthralled me in ways I never expected sheep could do. And here she stands before me, unaware, at least I hope, of how much she means to me. 2 young women enter the shop dressed in the latest pastels, with touches of lace at the collars. Miss Melissa Lee Saltworth and Miss Lynette Culpepper, whom I call Salt and Pepper, though never allowed, are the daughters of merchant aristocrats. Unlike the older cities of Savannah and Charleston, in Atlanta you don't need a family name to boost your social standing. You can climb the ladder by sheer business muscle. Of course, muscles, business or otherwise, never made a difference to how high Chinese could climb. "Good morning, Miss Saltworth, Miss Culpepper. How are you today?" Mrs. English calls over her shoulder. Into the back of the room, "Lizzie!" Lizzie appears. "Why, good morning, Mrs. Bell. How's Nathan? I haven't seen him delivering the papers at Father's store lately." "He's well, Lizzie. The reporting keeps him very busy these days. I shall tell him you send your regards." Lizzie lingers at the counter, a dreamy smile upon her fair face. Mrs. English clears her throat loudly and cocks her head meaningfully toward Salt and Pepper. Lizzie takes a languid steps toward the ladies as if the floor were full of horse patties. The building could be burning down and she would still take her time. Salt points to the top shelf, where we display the finest offerings, and with a wooden pole, Lizzie retrieves a straw hat in mauve with a cloud of tulle. I bite my tongue in frustration. Mauve would definitely clash with Salt's peachy skin. "A 2-week exclusive, then. I hope there will be nothing more," Mrs. Bell adds with force. Mrs. English nods at me, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Mrs. Bell's gaze also travels to me. I summon some poise, not wanting her to think me a heathen. "Did you have a particular event in mind, or is it for everyday wear?" I ask, my tongue strangely thick. "I would like something unique, a conversation starter. It's for the horse race." Salt, who's been admiring the straw hat in Lizzie's hands, exclaims, "I'm fizzed about that race. We came as early as we could." Pepper twirls her parasol with such energy she might have been divoting the ground for water. "I hope your Mr. Q invites you soon." According to Pepper, Mr. Quackenbach, the son of a financier who lost his fortune backing Confederate dollars, is smitten with Miss Saltworth and seeking her hand. The Quackenbach name still holds currency, even if his bank account does not, and Mr. Q has the sort of dreamy face that could ripple even the sourest buttermilk. If I were as wealthy as Salt, the only thing I would give a gold digger like Mr. Q is my foot. Anyway, according to old Jin, the real looker is his horse, a rare piebald with a white coat, offset by a black mane and tail. Mrs. Bell nods at the newcomers. "Actually, ladies are encouraged to ask the men. We printed the posters ourselves." "Yes, but no respectable woman would actually do that," says Mrs. English. Mrs. Bell loses a smile. "The proceeds benefit the society for the betterment of women. Perhaps it is appropriate in this instance." Salt pushes the mauve hat back at Lizzie, to my relief. "But it's so bold. What if the gentleman refused? I should be humiliated." "He won't." Pepper tucks a black ringlet back under her crushed velvet capote, a hat I made just last week. "It sounds wonderful," Lizzie breathes, squeezing the mauve hat so hard I think I hear it whimper. I expect Mrs. English to reprimand her, but instead she's staring at the cash register, a smile fanned across her face. Perhaps she's remembering all the orders the horse race is generating. A tiny bubble of hope rises in my chest. Pesky thing. I spend my last hours as a milliner in the back room, creating Mrs. Bell's embellishment. Lucky Yip, one of the 2 uncles I remember, taught me the folk art of knot tying one summer when a cloudbuster made it difficult to leave the basement. All you need is silk cord and your fingers. Mrs. Bell's plain felt sports a duck brim in front, and a lifted back for her hair. To wake up its dull planes, I work cord into rose and pansy knots. I add green ribbons to suggest foliage. The first time I was sacked, I'd been polishing banisters at the prestigious Payne estate, where old Jin had worked ever since stepping foot on American soil 20 years earlier. I had grown up on the estate, working first as a stable girl and sometimes playmate to the Payne's spoiled daughter, until I was promoted to a housemaid. The linseed oil was still slick on my fingers when Mrs. Payne snatched my rag and pointed it toward the door. Go! At least Mrs. English had given a reason for dismissing me. Not a good one, but it beat no reason at all. Lizzie drifts in from the front. Her breathy sighs pelt me from behind. The butterfly I'm knotting slips, and I throw her a wet look. May I help you? It should have been me. I don't love this job like you do. I deflate, wishing she would make it easier for me to dislike her. Once you get the hang of things, you'll like it better. She glances toward the shop, which, judging by the chatter, is full of patrons. Instead of leaving, she drops into a chair. I bet that horse race will be fine as fox fur. She intertwines her fingers, and her shoulders lift. I cannot help musing that the world would be a happier place if we could all do the things we want to do. I like making hats. I do not want to be a maid to a spoiled southern miss. Lizzie does not want to make hats. She wants to be the spoiled southern miss. And as for Mrs. English, her life would be easier if she just kept me and got rid of Lizzie. At least I would make her profitable. A few more twists complete my butterfly, its wings spread as if to fly. I am just putting the finishing stitches in my arrangement when Mrs. Bell returns. It's lovelier than I could have imagined. Mrs. Bell turns her head from side to side in front of our mirror. It's a miracle you finished it so fast. I resist checking for Mrs. English's reaction as she completes a row of sums next to me. Thank you, ma'am. You should always wear a little color because... Mrs. English clears her throat loudly. I bite my tongue, realizing this is the kind of opining that cooked my goose. Well, because we all should. Mrs. Bell smiles and holds out a nickel to me. I couldn't, I stammer. I occasionally receive tips, but it doesn't feel right to take money from her when I owe her so much. Her smile wobbles, and I realize I'm being suspicious. I accept the coin. Thank you. She says in a low voice, May God always keep you in his palm. With that, I am back to worrying that she does know about old Jin and me. Has she just given her implicit approval for that situation to continue? But why say something so final, unless she thought we would not meet again? Is she planning to reveal us after all? Her face betrays nothing. She's back to admiring her hat in the reflection. That's the end of chapter 2. If you want to read more of this book, you can check it out at the library. You can call and request any books or items that you would like through our curbside pickup service. I hope you have a great weekend. See you again next week. Bye! According to Pepper, Mr. Quackenbach. Oh my goodness. According to Pepper, Mr. Salt blushes like a sunset against the white blonde crow. I can't.